I was an EMT for a while. We got a call about someone who was riding their bike at a breakneck speed when they hit a car head first without a helmet. We went over immediately. Despite the fact that it was broad daylight and we were in the middle of suburbia on a Saturday, nobody even came to check on this poor guy. Seriously, the streets were empty. Usually a massive crowd gathers around violent accidents like this. So his skull was pretty much smashed in and he was unresponsive. It was the worst head injury I'd ever seen. We assessed that he had a major skull fracture, a concussion, and he was bleeding profusely. He was also missing teeth and had a minor road rash, but fortunately he wasn't missing much skin. To give you an idea of how bad it was, this was the kind of injury that most people don't survive. If you did survive, you'd basically be a crippled vegetable. Normally we would have moved him off the road, but when someone has a head or neck injury, that isn't very safe. My partner, who was also training me as I was still kind of new, went to check his pulse while I began to unload our gear. He crouched down, felt for a pulse for a while, and then stood up and opened his mouth to say something. Suddenly, the guy just jumped up. He didn't use his arms to pick himself up, he just jumped up to his feet. It startled the two of us. He looked at us, smiled, and attempted to grab his bike. We tried to stop him, but we didn't exactly want to wrestle him to the ground given his condition. He gets away from us and bolts into the woods without his bike. My partner was in even more disbelief than I was. He just stared at where the man had run off, mouth agape. Then he turned to me and muttered, "He had no damn pulse, man." I asked him if he was sure and he swore up and down that the biker was clinically dead. We contacted the authorities for assistance and they sent a search and rescue team into the forest. Keep in mind this was the Pine Barrens, so they had a lot of ground to cover. Head injuries usually cause people to become violent or uncooperative, but they've got to be very careful with them because moving their head or neck around too much can cause damage to the spine. When he got up, it really took us by surprise and it didn't help that he moved pretty damn quickly. As he attempted to grab his bike, my partner attempted to grab his arm. He pretty quickly slipped away and ran. We immediately contacted authorities and told them. Once they arrived, we told them what we knew and they sent a small team to find him. I imagine they did find him because he clearly was never reported missing. If he had, I imagine the news would have jumped on it. The first responders are never really given information about a patient after they do their job, so I can't say for sure what happened to him after he ran. I can say with complete confidence that he had no pulse when we found him, but somehow he was still alive. I've been in law enforcement for nearly 6 years and I've had a few supernatural things occur during my shifts. The most recent one came after a 911 hang-up call. I was riding with another officer on a summer night and it was probably around 2 or 3 a.m. when we get a call for a 911 hang-up. We were told that a call was placed to 911 and upon answering, a person hung up. When dispatch attempted to call the number back, no one answered. The area in which I was working tonight I have basically spent my whole career in. There aren't a whole lot of streets I have yet to respond to. However, the address that this came from I had never been to. I have driven past this road many times, but I never actually received a call from it. We pull up to this old dirt road. It has a metal chain going across the entrance with a sign that says no trespassing. Because we have to figure out what is going on, me and my partner continue on foot up this long dirt gravel road. The road was maybe about 100 yards long. The annoying part was that on each side of the road was a tall chain link fence. Why this was annoying was because me and my partner were now walking down a fatal funnel. If there happened to be a guy waiting for us at the end of this road with, let's say, an assault rifle, he would have no place to take cover. Thankfully, this did not happen. We eventually reached the end of the road and there are 2 houses on each side. At first we believed one of these houses is where the 911 call came from. As I'm shining my flashlight at one of the houses, I see a figure move inside. Instantly I'm like, oh crap, people actually live here, as I thought for sure the houses were going to be vacant. Shortly after, a man and a woman walk outside and ask what is going on. We told them we received a 911 hang-up call from their address and if anyone had called. The man tells us that we have the wrong address and the address we're looking for is basically in the middle of these tall weeds, forest looking area just in the north of this house. He says the house is vacant and run down and it can only be reached on foot. I asked him how far away it is from his house and he says probably a couple of football fields away. Now, while all this walking / investigating was going on, we had received 2 more 911 hang-up calls. Same address, same result. Before we made this trek out into the middle of the woods, we called for another car and eventually another 2-man unit responded. The four of us now wandered out into the woods, two of us with our assault rifles out, and followed a barely beaten path to where we assumed we would find a house. After fighting spiderwebs and low-hanging tree branches, we eventually reached our destination. I am terrible at describing things, but this house was straight out of a horror movie. It was run down. It had a tree that had fallen through the middle and now has become part of the house throughout the years. The house was nearly falling apart and was completely overgrown by greenery. Having come this far, we decided to continue on, even though we're pretty sure the house would be vacant. After fighting through some thick brush, we find our entrance. We each have to climb over some fallen brick walls and other wooden materials before we actually made our entry. My biggest fear at this point is this stupid rotten house collapsing on itself and being trapped inside, with no one being able to find us. We searched the entire house and we thought no one was inside. And when I say we searched the entire house, I mean the entire house. Nothing was left unchecked. Feeling satisfied, we climb our way out and start heading back towards where the two original houses were. As we walk back, dispatch radios us and tells us they received another 911 hang-up call coming from the same address. This time, dispatch tells us they were able to make a call back, and when the person answered, they could only hear what sounded like a child playing on the phone. The four of us looked at each other and decided we were done with this call. We had done everything we could at that point, and we were not about to get called back into what could be a demon's house because a child was on the phone. We cleared the call and didn't receive any more 911 hang-up calls for the rest of the night. Fast forward maybe 6 months and it's a dead cold winter. We get another 911 hang-up from the same address. This time it's me and 3 guys who weren't there previously. I tell them the story of what happened and all 3 of them are super psyched and wanted to check it out. The 4 of us walk back out to the house, now much easier to get to since the cold had killed off a lot of the greens. The 3 of them decide to go into the house. I waited outside as I already had my fun. They don't make it too far once they realize this house is about to collapse on itself. No callback from a child this time. If I ever go out there again, I'll try and get a picture of the house, just so when I tell the other people this story, they can have a better understanding of just how messed up this house actually is. Okay, so I was supervising the evening shift in a small town in rural Australia. We have a large river that snakes its way past the town and runs close to some of the residential areas. It's a kilometer wide in some parts and has steep banks and thick bush in the bed when it's dry. One of my crews were tied up with something and the other was attending 2 brothers threatening suicide after a fight at a residence near the bank of the river. I heard the job and attended to give my crew a hand. Upon arrival, we found one brother who was self-harming and on drugs. We restrained him and prevent him from harming himself. He was telling us he wanted to kill himself and was taken to a hospital via ambulance for mental health. As we had made the apprehension, my crew had accompanied the ambulance for everyone's safety. My crew leaves, and then I'm told by the family that the other brother had run off down the river and was threatening to hang himself. The family said he was drunk but didn't have anything to actually hang himself with. I was concerned and attended the riverbanks near where they thought he went down the steep bank. Both crews were busy and I was by myself at night. I parked my unit at the top of the bank with the lights pointing onto the bush, hoping that if he saw my lights he'd come towards me. I got out my torch and made my way down the bank. I found a small clearing and a small distance away was thick bush. I heard something moving in a bush. It sounded like something taking deliberate steps in the bush. I yelled out thinking it was the guy I was after. I told him I was here to help and pleaded with him to come out. No response, and when I was talking, whatever it was stopped moving. I kept talking, attempting to make contact as my instincts told me someone was in the thick bush in front of me. No response. My torch couldn't penetrate the bush, but I could hear the distinct footfalls. I stopped making any noise, turned off my light, and stood still listening. I hear movement coming towards me in a bush. I remained still and listened. It came closer. Without thinking, my hand went down to my gun and I was ready to draw. I turned on my light and walked forward and heard whatever it was move away from me. I backed off, turned off my light, and remained silent. It started coming closer to me, probing my position. I repeated the exercise once more, and once more it backed off and came back at a different angle. By this stage, I was on high alert. Something was telling me to get out of there. I got this heavy, eerie feeling. Any animal that was down there would have run off upon my approach. No animal I know approaches or probes the human position at night like that. Once I got the overwhelming feeling to leave, I backed off with my hand on my gun, and I didn't turn back until I had to climb up the bank. Once at the top and back with my car, I felt a lot better, but I could still hear something moving in a bush. I stayed there for a while as I was curious. I left and conducted inquiries, finding the missing brother on the other side of the town fast asleep and fine. To this day, I don't know what I ran into down in the riverbed that night.